All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for, I don't even know what number this is, but for maybe our fifth or sixth, maybe even seventh Give STL Day training for 2022. I'm excited to be able to have all of you here with us today. We will be recording this conversation and this presentation for further viewing. So if you have an opportunity to go back and want to watch it again, or if you know, if you have a colleague or a board member volunteer who you'd like to see this presentation, it will be available on our website and we will send a recap for everyone. I want to welcome everyone again. There are a bunch of people still coming in. But yes, so Elizabeth George, who's our Director of Community Investment, and Emily Seiple, who's the Community Investment Associate, is actually going to be giving the presentation today. I will forego introductions specifically in bios just because they are actually, they have a lot of great content. So again, I just want to welcome you all. This will be recorded. If you have questions throughout the conversation, feel free to drop them in the chat. Nikki Martinez is also on our team at the Community Foundation and will help answer questions as we go. And I will be back here for tech support. So I'm excited to get this conversation going, and I will turn it over to Elizabeth and Emily. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for being with us today. We're really excited about this because we see this topic of needs assessments as really critical in program development and also in helping us as grant makers knowing why your program is important. To kick us off, if you could please put in the chat your name, your organization, and one question you hope to have answered today or answered through this training. And while you're doing that, we'll go ahead and get started with the content. So anyway, so this is always the key question. Why do we need a needs assessment? And for those of you who are with us today, this is kind of our nerdy session. That's really not as much about Give STL Day, unless you, at the end of this, decide to update the description for whatever program project or your organization as a whole on your Give STL Day page. Last year, when Nikki and I did the grant writing session, we heard from some of you that knowing more about needs assessments, knowing how to go about doing a needs assessment would be really helpful. And so that's why we added this session in last year, or this year. When we think about the purpose of a needs assessment, and particularly when you're talking to people like Nikki and Emily and me, it's really easy to think, well, it's just because they ask for that on the grant application, right? And the purpose of a needs assessment really isn't about the grant proposal and really isn't about letting your funder know why this program is important. The purpose of a needs assessment is to ensure that your program is meeting a community need, addressing an issue that we see out in community. And if the only reason that your organization is doing needs assessments is for your grant writing, then you probably have a disconnect between the grant writer and the program folks. And whenever we see that disconnect, we know that that we as funders might not be getting the whole story. And we also know, we don't know, but we surmise that you're also, that maybe the grant writing isn't really reflecting what the program need is. So anyway, that's why we think this is so important. And we're starting out with this map, from the Clark Fox Family Foundation, because it exemplifies something that we see in our community. This map shows the child well-being ecosystem, as it says, but what it also indicates is if you get on the Clark Fox Family Foundation website and you start digging into the maps that they have, you're going to see that we have a lot of nonprofits in our community. And as you think about a needs assessment in your program design, one of the things a needs assessment will do will be looking at the supply. It'll be looking at, is there really a need for another program to meet, to serve a certain population, or another organization to serve that population. We hear all the time, we get calls all the time from someone who has a great idea because, you know, there is no one really doing good after school programming. And if you look at this map, you're going to see there are a lot of people that are doing really good after school programming, and maybe you can connect your idea to one of those other organizations. The other thing is, as you're thinking about your needs assessment, a map like this can be a great resource for you for how to identify and connect with others in your community or others in St. Louis who are who can serve as a resource for you as you're thinking about your needs assessment. So anyway, we are going to start with a quick poll. And so Emily, if we can go. Here are the poll questions. So the question is, where are you with needs assessment? So is it, and just go ahead and click on the answer. My organization has a needs assessment, or my program has a needs assessment that's integrated into programs and grant writing. I don't know if we've ever done a needs assessment. Only the grant writer uses the needs assessment, and oops, I think I'm in the wrong training. So go ahead and submit, and we'll see where you all are. Neosha, can you let us know how many we have in?
Yep, we've got 24 out of 35. So we'll give everybody about 15 more seconds. That'll give us a minute total for people to answer.
And there are a few of us that won't be answering.
Absolutely.
Okay, so most of you don't know whether your program has a needs assessment behind it, or your organization. Some of you know that you do, that 20%, 19%. And then we have a few. I'm really excited to see that there are some of you that are in the wrong training. We hope you'll stick around anyway. Okie doke. Okay, so that's helpful for us to know. That's really helpful for us to know. So let's start by talking about the elements of a good needs assessment. Oh, somebody said, oops, we forgot. Nope, no needs assessment. Let's talk about how we define the need. So there are 4 key questions that you can ask yourself as you're trying to define your need, and to determine if there is real need for your program. And there are academic terms that for each of these questions, but we'll just start with the question. So, you know, what are people experiencing their needs to be? That's a perceived need. So that's when you ask someone. You may not ask directly, what are your needs, but it's that question. When you think about your kids, what kinds of programming would you like for your kids? What do you think your kids need in terms of after school care or early childhood care? So that's asking and getting that perception from folks. The second is, what services are people seeking? That's expressed need. And you see expressed need come when people actually show up. So someone might say, you know, I really, really want that parenting class. I need to know more about parenting. I understand that. But then when you offer the parenting class at 3 different times, they don't show up. There's a difference between perceived need and expressed need. The other place you can look at express need is your own waiting lists. If you have waiting lists for your programs, then you know that people are really showing up for that. And it tells you that that program is needed. Then there's, what are the experts in the research saying? The normative need. This is sort of your evidence-based practice. We know that quality after school programming is one protective factor for mental health service or for mental health needs. So, you know, that's when we look at the research and we look at the evidence to support the programs that we want to bring forward. And then finally, there's that, how do needs and resources in one area compare to needs and resources in another area? And I want to make sure that when we say area here, we're not just talking about geographic area. It could be income differences. It could be racial differences. It could be age differences. There are a lot of different areas that we might be talking about when we're thinking about that. I think I was on a call this morning around the Missouri Senior Report that they're updating. And that's one that provides comparative data county by county around seniors or older adults. So that's an example of where you can find that kind of comparative data. We're going to go at the end of this presentation and give you a list of some different resources. So where to find data is coming. Okay, so elements of a needs assessment. So what goes into a good needs assessment? First of all, we want to see that you have a really strong understanding of the problem behind the problem you're trying to address. What's going on in the community that you feel you need to step in with either the current program that you have or a new program or expanding your program? What is the need that you're trying to address there? Secondly, what's the data behind the need? The data that tells you that that really is a need. Thirdly, we ask for demand. How do you know that people want this service? And then supply. Go back to that map from the Clark Fox Family Foundation. Who else is providing services? Who else could you work with, and or who else could you, or are there enough people providing this need or filling this need that perhaps your program would be duplicative? And then external trends. What are those external trends that are creating or exacerbating need? And I think anyone who's lived through the last couple of years can come up with at least one of those, right? I want to give you an example here of how we could look at these elements and address them in thinking about a particular need or a particular problem. So, as many of you know, the St. Louis community has welcomed about 600 Afghans since the fall of Kabul in August. And they're all coming through the refugee, not all, most are coming through the refugee resettlement program that requires that there is housing for these 600 folks within 90 days, permanent housing within 90 days. So if we think about that, we know that there is data there. There's existing research through the Affordable Housing Report Card that shows that there are housing shortages, that quality housing is hard to find, and particularly housing with bedroom sizes that we need for the Afghan families. So, 3 bedrooms or more. The Afghan families tend to be large, and there are federal restrictions on, age and gender and who could be in the same room and who can't be. So we know we need larger apartments or houses. We also know that those are hard to find. The express need is that we've got folks that have been in residential hotels for 5 days, tends to be a smaller family, through to as many as 60, 65, 70 days. A couple of weeks ago, I had a conversation with a woman from Afghanistan. Her family had been in the extended hotel for 22 days, and she said that was long, but she was one of the lucky ones. We look at demand, and we know there are 600 folks that need these services, and then we look at supply, and we see that in terms of outfitting an apartment or a small house, we've got folks that are giving furniture and food and the health and beauty supplies and pots and pans. That's there. But the gap is in the supply of the actual housing. And whether that is rehabbing housing or whether that's new construction, that takes time. And it takes time to find those, and it takes time to create those. The external trends here is that in terms of case management and things, over the last several years, the refugee resettlement community have really been impacted by, at the federal level, cuts in the number of refugees allowed into the country and the funding for that. So that we actually saw a real shrink in the number of services and the people providing the services for refugees. And now, boom, all of a sudden it explodes. So that's one thing. The other thing is that resettlement dollars only cover 90 days or 3 months of housing payments. So that's another one of those trends that we have to pay attention to. So where do we go with this? How do we think about this programmatically? How do we use all that data to come up with some answers? So it could be that we're going to convene housing or the lender community to make longer term plans. It could be we're going to support case management so that we can navigate the housing resources better. It could be that we're going to set up a platform for community referrals to landlords with appropriate housing options. So there are a lot of different things you can do, but you have to understand what the issue is. Okay? I know that's a long example, but we wanted to give that to you to have a sense of how this works. Okay, so problem, data, demand, supply, external trends. For those of you on phones, this is going to be a little tiny writing. If you've got a full-size computer screen, what we'd like you to do is just take a minute and read through this example. We did get permission from the organization that wrote this in a grant proposal to use their needs example, and we also abbreviated it. But take a minute, read through it, and then come off mute and let us know where you see problem, where you see data, where you see demand, where you see supply, where you see trends. Anybody want to take a guess? Don't be shy. How about if I start out? The data is really clear, right? We've got those 3 bullet points that give us some really good data points. Right, as Nikki said, you can use the chat if you're. Wendy, it seems a little disconnected between the need and the research. Some of that is because we edited this down. So believe it or not, we couldn't get the whole thing on one slide. Okay, well, I'll let you guys just think yourselves. The social worker in me says enough silence. But one thing for you to be thinking about as you're writing a needs statement is that not every needs statement will cover every element. You want to hit the highlights. You want to make sure that you know for yourself and you know for others, and you can show others that this program is necessary, that you've got the understanding of these 5 elements. And, you know, we think about this in terms of, this was written for a grant proposal, but think about some of the other audiences that you might be going in front of. It might be you're going in front of your board to get approval for a new program. It might be that you're going in front of community partners that you're asking for either referrals in or referrals out, and you need to be able to show that, you know, there really is need. And it might be that you're going to your community partners to collaborate. Emily's going to talk a little bit about a really cool collaboration that came out of a needs study. And it might be that you're going to your constituents, to your program participants, and of course, then there are the funders. So anyway, with that, and if you have any other thoughts about this, this example, please do put them in the chat. But with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Awesome. Thank you, Elizabeth. I put this in the chat, but I was really excited to see kind of the different questions and reasons for coming to the session that you all included. And I've seen some names that I recognize from organizations who, as a just total transparent nerd, I love your needs assessment process. And then I saw some people who have put in the chat that this is kind of a new concept. And so I just want to say before I move on that no one is starting at ground zero. You have incredible experience, either yourself with your organization or your colleagues. And, you know, even just learning from them and their experience, that's also part of a needs assessment. So as I said, I'm going to put on my nerd hat and going to go into a lot of data sources and just places you can start. And I hope you can see it as a menu of options for what makes sense for your organization's needs and your capacity at this time. Okay, so kind of looking big at where to find data out in the community as you think about the needs your organization is trying to meet. This is a big, long list. I hope that you recognize something that you've used before or have considered before, whether it's in a community meeting, asking people what needs they're seeing, or you've gone onto some websites and started looking for reports, and maybe you see something on this list that you'd really like to try. So kind of starting really big, you can get a lot of great data from public sources like the US Census. The US Census also does the American Community Survey, which you can get really granular data down to zip codes or census block groups. And then we just have a wealth of reports in St. Louis as well that the state puts out, that universities put out, that different organizations have been contracted to do. So lots of reports. As Elizabeth said, we have a list of them with some links at the end of this presentation so that you have it as a reference and starting position. And it's the tip of the iceberg. So we really have a great wealth of knowledge in this community. Like we are funders, and so we're really we recognize that other funders who have particular areas that they've funded in over time, they put resources on their websites as well. Libraries are here to help you. There's a number of community needs assessments that certain organizations are required to do, like hospitals. So like BJC or SSM, they need to find out what needs that their organization is seeking to meet. And I know when I was formerly a grant writer in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and those were really fantastic resources for me because, as I hope we can kind of demonstrate over time, this is a rabbit trail of information. You might start at one published report you find, and you might think, oh, this isn't the best fit for me, but maybe there's a citation in there, or maybe the way that they have synthesized some census data is really useful to you. And so you get to leverage someone else's work for your organization and your work to dig deeper into the need that makes sense for you. Really like taking other people's work and building on it. I hope that there's ways to do that after we're done today. I wanted to highlight the wealth of universities and students that we have in this community. Again, they have access to kind of cutting edge research that not everyone in a nonprofit does. There's access issues to research institutions. And one thing that I did as a grant writer was utilize students to help synthesize research that I didn't have access to. And it's easy for them. It's one person did one person did 12. And so that was like a pretty simple job description to post on their job sources. And I'd be happy to talk with anyone about that. I just wanted to highlight that as a potential resource. And then kind of going back to that rabbit trail idea, you can see other organizations' needs assessments or their reports, whether or not their findings directly align with your mission of your organization. Sometimes a piece of it gives you context because all of you are working in spaces where the needs are complex and they overlap. It's not always easy to pull all the issues apart. And so just learning from what these other organizations are finding about needs could be really helpful for your own program. And if that information doesn't directly apply, you might see something really compelling in their process or their approach to their needs assessment that you could use as a roadmap as you are kind of starting out on your own needs assessment. And we'll go into some examples so that hopefully that becomes more clear. So one example I wanted to highlight, this is actually a national report. As Elizabeth and Nikki and I are talking with nonprofits kind of across the board, the mental health crisis for our youth, especially exacerbated by the pandemic, is something that we've been hearing about a lot. And so this is an example of national recognition of that issue. And so even though you might be saying, hey, there's not going to be local data in there, you could use what a report like this is talking about to say, hey, this is what the US Surgeon General is saying about this issue, and here's how we're seeing it in our own sphere on the ground in St. Louis. Also, sometimes these kind of higher level reports. They'll have examples of best practices. And so you can use that in terms of discussions internally about what your organization can be doing. And also you can use it to kind of justify your approach. Like, hey, we are doing this. This report said it's the right thing to be doing, or we're doing some of this and we need to seek resources to add on this strategy. And there will be a link for this one at the end too. So kind of moving down to more state level or local resources. These are just a couple examples. And I just highlighted some data sources that would help kind of dig into equity outcomes or needs that are different across race and geography. And so one of them is from the Missouri Hospital Association. And beyond health equity, they have a number of other kind of big categories that they provide resources on. So I know this image is a little small, but kind of in the bottom corner, you can see that they have a whole media library. And so again, this is all linked at the end, but this resource is available because they want community organizations and leaders to have access to great data so that they can carry health outcomes forward. And then in the kind of bottom right corner, this is from the city of St. Louis. They did a whole report on equity indicators. And to be honest, I have never used it as this kind of PDF form, but their website's fantastic for getting to a number of statistics quickly. And those, again, can kind of be that rabbit trail of leading you to other sources you could look at. And they give some great information about why each of those indicators matters for equity. And it goes across a wide range of kind of fields and community service sectors. And then in the top right, this very lovely report cover on the first step to equity. And this is all about early childhood education needs. And IFF.org, I don't know if you can see that link, they have done a number of other research initiatives. And so if you go to their website, you could see, again, maybe a roadmap for how you could approach some of your own needs assessment work. And we're gonna dig into their methodology just a tiny bit. And again, if you are not necessarily working in early childhood, I hope that this could still show you the way people approach needs and designing their program. So I took this directly from their report, and it is really, truly their process. So they started with local data, and we've talked about some of the sources where you could find that in the other slide, whether that is from your coworkers in the field, other agencies, whether it's the census, whether it's a great report that you find. It could be this very report itself, the F report. It's full of great data. And so then moving on from that local data, I'm going to kind of dig into this gap analysis, because as Elizabeth opened us up with looking at who's asking and demonstrating need for services versus what's available is a really key place you could dig into with a needs assessment. And so that gap analysis, in their example, they were using some census information to determine how many children likely need formal early childhood education. And then they were seeing how many seats or slots, are available in this system. And that gap is the gap analysis. And so that might be something where you can use your own internal data, or again, talking to others who are working in your field to figure out this need and supply. And I'll share an example about that at a later slide, but to give you a sense of where you could find some of that data. Again, your internal information, internal agency statistics. And if you're new to your position, you can ask, hey, where do I find this? Or start asking the people who have been working for a long time. I know in my really small organization, I was the first full-time employee. A lot of that information was in the minds of the other people who had been working in it beforehand. And you can be part of getting it written down. That would be a huge thing for your organization. It's just, we're all building from wherever we're starting from. Some people have done full surveys of clients. You can be talking in groups like the Regional Health Commission or the St. Louis Mental Health Board, or Continuum of Care. If you're working with houseless communities, like the groups that are pulling everyone together to try to coordinate services. That's a great way to find out what is really needed. So again, kind of answering that question, who's asking, are people asking, and what are they saying they need? And then kind of on the flip side, determining what is happening to meet that need and who else is in this space, and is it enough? Do we need a different kind? And a lot of the same partners or sources of information will be key. Your partner agencies, those intermediary groups, like I was talking about, and also funders' websites can be a great resource, seeing past grant awards and funded partners to see who else is working in priority areas that your organization might be looking at in terms of seeking funding. So that was kind of a deeper dive into that gap analysis piece from the roadmap of that particular report. And I just wanted to highlight one other piece on their process, which is that they did something called gathering community voices. And the way they did, that was interviewing kind of the people who are key in their world. And so that included parents, that included teachers. For you, that could include just the people who you're interacting with each day. That could include, again, back to those agency partners, experts in your field. And sometimes maybe that feels more accessible than doing a really big dive into a lot of data. It's just talking to the people who know what's happening in the sphere that your organization's working in. I'd also want to highlight that, that can also take a lot of time. And as St. Louis it's a city that loves its reports, I will say. And so you can find in so many of these reports, especially my world has been looking at a lot of health needs reports, really great, fantastic information about community engagement processes where brilliant people in our community who know what their needs are have already shared it multiple times. And sometimes you can access and kind of honor that input that people have already given by using those reports again. And so if you don't have the capacity right now to launch your own interview process, you might find some really great community feedback from existing reports.
And I want to, if it's okay, jump in here for a quick sec. There was a question in the chat that said, how do we provide incentives for people to engage, for the community to be a part of this? And, if to be a part of your needs assessment. And, sometimes it's as easy as going where they are. So going to the grocery store. Now you have to have staff to do this, right? Or pay a contractor to go to the grocery store and hang out there and talk to people as they go in or go out. Or with a focus group, having childcare if you are trying to talk to anybody that's of childbearing age, and you want people who have families, because if you don't provide that childcare, then whether you're talking about children and youth service or not, but if you don't have that childcare, then people can't come. There's some easy things that you can do. Feed people, give them a small gift card. It doesn't even have to be $25. Sometimes it could just be a $10 gift card to a food service or to Quick Trip or something. There are a lot of different things that you can do to provide that incentive. That the most important thing, I think, is to make sure that people know that as you ask for their feedback, you are going to use their feedback, and to have that trusting relationship, to build that that sense of you are asking not just to ask, but you're asking to use to use that information.
Thank you. I can't see the chat super easily while I'm sharing my screen, so I appreciate that. And that is a kind of good link to what I was talking about too. And maybe it's not a section of a report, but I think especially as the world's been online or virtual, so much so in the past couple of years, a number of organizations have done surveys. And so, that might even be a step of finding out other groups working in the same space as you or seeking similar information, finding out if they've already done something pretty recently and seeing if you can build on their findings too. just to limit the amount of time that, or limit the number of surveys that are going out, or just being really strategic with the new information that you want to add to build on with that. So this, just to be really clear, like this IFF report, this example that I kind of pulled a couple images from, they had a lot of resources because this was the goal of this was to be used by a lot of people in the community, and it's been used to start a collective group that's working around early childhood issues. So this isn't just one organization, it was meant to be used community-wide. And so you don't have to come up with a report that's this in-depth for your own organization, but just, again, kind of looking at their process and picking whatever it makes the most sense for your capacity and needs at this time. And so with that said, we would love to jump into some breakout rooms. If Neosha is able to help me out with that, and maybe if Nikki, you could throw the questions in the chat too, or just someone for me.
Sure. Emily, how long do you want the breakout rooms to last?
I think just 5 minutes is great.
Okay, just a moment. Nikki, I just broadcasted your message to the group.
Oh, thank you, because I can't get into breakout rooms.
No, all good. There are a few people still left here who did not join, so just FYI. So you're welcome to chat here if you like.
Meeting is being recorded.
Hey, welcome back, everyone. I hope that you made some fun connections. So one example from my breakout room was that Wendy from Paraquad shared the St. Louis Philanthropic Organization's website in the chat. And apparently if you reach out to them, they can give you access and they have a lot of great resources. So that's not on our slides at the end. So that is a new exciting resource that we learned about. And so if there's any of that kind of takeaway from your breakout room that you want to throw in the chat, that'd be awesome. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen. Awesome. Sorry, getting myself all situated again. Okay. And again, one of the pieces we haven't talked about too much yet is environmental trends. It's also something you can throw into the chat as well. I think it's almost too real for how much some changes in the world have thrown off work and what needs need to be responded to. But if you want to share other examples, some that we hear nonprofits report back to us would be policy environment, staffing. I can't see the chat at this moment, but others will monitor it. And so if you want to give examples of some things that have affected your work, that's a great thing to include in a needs assessment and conversations with funders. And so just gonna kind of move through this next section a little quickly because we would love to kind of get to some of those questions you've already entered. So in terms of pulling it all together, some questions to consider as you start or kind of refine your needs assessment process is how will this be used? Again, as Elizabeth said, and I think really rightly, if the only place that this is going to end up, all this information is in a grant application, then I think you're putting in a lot more resources than you're getting back out. Because ultimately, this kind of process, whether it's those internal conversations or learning what others in the community are doing, should really impact your organization and your mission overall. And so a key question is that who will use it inside the organization? I remember kind of as a grant writer always asking, hey, like, could we talk about what I'm putting in the grant applications? And it just took a while to kind of wrap minds around all the ways that these really kind of deep questions that come up on grants could inform program decisions. And so thinking about taking what you're learning in this process and using that in a program evaluation, or I think Elizabeth had mentioned too, like what would the board like to know as they make a decision? You could really build a lot of excitement and momentum along your organization as a whole by putting some of this information out there. And then who will use it outside of your organization? The IF report, that First Step to Equity report we were looking at is a great example. Like that was used really broadly by the community to create kind of a coalition building program to really make sure that early childhood resources have investment. And so maybe that there's a partner organization who would really like to see your work and could give feedback, or you've identified a gap and that's something they could step into. Or, people that maybe are in your target population who share their expertise and information with you, they'd like to see what the results look like, and maybe could give you feedback on if something was missed. And I think as you are considering your capacity and needs at this time, just thinking about how you will use it at the end can help make decisions about what all to include or omit in this process. So as you think about how to use this for programming, we've given a lot of examples of where you can find numbers and kind of connecting to see what with other organizations to see what available services are, and ultimately figuring out if the need you thought was there truly is, or what it looks like, and then whether your organization can take that on, or if someone else is able to. And so a good example of that is one of the foundations we work with had an application come to them where a partner organization of the one who was applying had actually identified a really big gap for a large number of families that they didn't have the service that could meet their needs. And so they reached out to another organization and said, here's the need that we've determined, and we think you have the services that could do it. And so that organization was able to apply. That's an incredibly strong application to put forth, and it also is really building the service capacity in the community. So that's a really exciting way to use a needs assessment and build trust across the service sector.
And then, a little bit more about building those external relationships, especially in this kind of post, but not always post-COVID world, when interactions are a little bit harder. I think there's been a lot of questions about that in the chat, building that community and those sorts of resources.
Like how to have conversations when things are virtual, is that? Sorry, still can't see the chat.
Yeah, just building those conversations in general, and finding out about those other resources. I mean, I'll jump in. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I will jump in at this point and say that we are a helpful resource because we actually have conversations with a lot of different folks, so we can really kind of sometimes in conversation help you put some threads together. Where otherwise you might not have done that. And our other bit of, it is a little bit harder because there is no organic gatherings of people. So there does have to be a lot more intentional conversations and, research about who's playing in that sandbox, so to speak. I think hopefully that answers the question that we've gotten a few times.
Yeah, and we can, if that didn't, we can come back to that in 1 second. I just want to say that that process we've outlined, that really also applies to current programming. We know that with the pandemic and so many other things, people have had to analyze their own programs and how they can shift them either to meet new and emerging needs or meet new service delivery requirements. And so if you're not, necessarily looking to start a new program, just kind of the sources of data and conversation we're having should help you think critically within your organization about what you're already providing. And I think we've kind of touched on this in terms of our examples. Funders do want to see that you know what the problem is, that there's data to support it, and that you're really connected in the community to know if there's some emerging needs that you or other partners are going to need resources to fill. And so with that, I'm going to just put the question slide up there. And I think I will stop sharing my screen so that I can't see the chat. Yeah, and we can...
Actually, Emily, why don't you just click through the other 2 slides so that people can see the data sources, and then we will be sending the slides out. I think Emily Bauman and Neosha will be sending the slides out. But now we're open for questions.
Okay.
And Nikki, if there's anything in the chat that we haven't gotten to.
I really think that one question that we didn't talk about was putting together information and data across databases. A lot of organizations, especially those that might, work with government agencies, might have several databases that they're working with. Sort of funneling that information together, if there's any insight on that.
Yeah, and there, we just have a smattering, just a few of the data resources that are available. You saw that list that Emily provided earlier. And if you go back and you look at the sample that we gave you, you'll see that they used 3 different bullet points from using 3 different resources, right? So what you do is you find the data that supports the position you're trying to put forward. And it doesn't all have to come from one resource. It doesn't all have to speak directly. Well, it does need to speak directly to the program that you're building or that you already have in place, and you want to make sure that data is supporting. But it's okay to pull from different resources, because quite honestly, that builds a better case. If you're just looking at one resource for all your data, you're going to miss a lot of richness, and it may not seem as if there is much data to support. So pull from different resources. There was also a chat or a question in the chat from iThrive, from Haley at iThrive, about, well, what if you can't find exactly what you need? And that happens a lot. So, you know, it may not be super easy to find the number of kids in the city of St. Louis or the St. Louis region that need glasses. But what you might be able to find is national data that you can then say, if we know at the national level that 28% of kids, and I don't know that this is the number, that 28% of kids need glasses and aren't able to secure them because they don't have access to an optometrist, they don't have the money for the glasses, you can then use that to say, well, we've got, you know, 300,000 kids in the St. Louis region. If we take 28% of those 300,000 kids, then we can surmise, or we can deduce is probably a better word, that, you know, 28% of 300, what's that, 76, no, I can't do math that fast, but I can, just not quite that fast. So anyway, 56 plus 28. So that's a way, if you can't find the exact data, or you find other proxy data. So, you know, maybe it's you're using access to dental care and say, you know, we don't have the data around access to eye care, but we can proxy. If you're not getting to a dentist, you're probably not getting to an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. So anyway, that's just one way to consider that. Other questions?
I would say too, to that question, if there's a specific need, it's hard to find data around. It could be because it's just coming up a lot in community meetings, and maybe there isn't a lot of data around it. And I think that that's a really great thing to include in conversations with funders or your colleagues, is saying, hey, I've been going to XYZ community meetings, and between this time and this time, this topic has been something we've all been talking about and trying to wrap our heads around. It doesn't always have to be a specific statistic that you're working with, because sometimes you just don't have it.
And as far as that data piece and pulling together your own data from different things within your organization, different programs, different databases that you might be using, you know, that can be a real challenge. And I'm a huge believer in utilizing and using Microsoft Office tools to solve your problems. I honestly have not explored Access quite as much as I could. I know Emily has, but I do know that but beyond Excel, Microsoft Access does give a lot of availability to utilize data and upload reports from various databases and pull everything together a little bit differently than Excel does.
And that might also be a good conversation to have at a staff learning or a staff meeting, to say, listen, we know that we're all collecting different data, either data on the people that we're serving or different data reports, such as Emily was talking about. How can we share that data better? How can we make sure that that we all are working off of the same numbers? Because we do see it sometimes where, you know, we get grant applications from from one organization, but two different programs within that give different data. And you do sort of kind of scratch your head and say, hey guys, what's really going on? Well, if there are no other questions, we're at the top of the hour. We've got a little bit more time if you want or need, but.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth and Nikki and Emily, for the presentation today. As a reminder, This has been recorded, and we will upload it to Zoom onto our website, so that way you all can have an opportunity to review if you would like to, or pass along to your team. I just wanted to also let you know that early giving for Give STL Day does start April 5th. So you should be preparing for that if you have strategy around early giving for your donors. Or if you have any additional questions regarding Give STL Day, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at info@stlgives.org. Or feel free to email Emily or myself, Emily Bauman, who's not on the call today, or myself directly, and we will try to help you as much as possible. So thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thank you.